I've already written a line or two of JavaScript. But what exactly is JavaScript? And what can we do with it? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out in this video. And so in this lecture, we will set the stage for the rest of the course. And so it's really important that you follow this one until the end. So we can define JavaScript in many different ways. But my definition is that it's a high-level, object-oriented, multi-paradigm programming language. And with that being said, can we move on to the next lecture now? Well, probably not. Because what does any of that actually mean? So let's deconstruct this just a little bit to at least make some sense out of this. And starting with programming language itself, a programming language is basically just a tool that allows us to write code that will instruct a computer to do something. And of course, that's our main goal of using JavaScript, right? Then I go on and say that JavaScript is a high-level language, which means that we don't have to think about a lot of complex stuff, such as managing the computer's memory while it runs our program. So in JavaScript, there are a lot of so-called abstractions over all these small details that we don't want to worry about. And this makes the language a lot easier to write and to learn. Next, I say that JavaScript is object-oriented. And all that means is that the language is mostly based on the concept of objects for storing most kinds of data. And of course, we will learn all about object-oriented programming throughout this course. Finally, JavaScript is also a multi-paradigm language, meaning that it's so flexible and versatile that we can use all kinds of different programming styles, such as imperative and declarative programming. And these different styles are just different ways of structuring our code, basically. Again, you will learn all about this throughout the course. This is just the first, very high-level overview, but I hope it's been making sense so far. Anyway, now that we know what JavaScript actually is, at least kind of, what is the role that it plays in web development? Or in other words, what do we actually use it for? And to answer that question, let's actually look at the three core technologies of the web: HTML, CSS, and of course, JavaScript. So these three technologies all work together to create beautiful, interactive, and dynamic websites or web applications. Now, the HTML is responsible for the content of the page. So the text, the images, the buttons, and all the content that you see on a web page is always written in HTML. Then the CSS is responsible for the presentation of that content. So basically for styling and for laying out the elements on a web page. And then finally, JavaScript is the real programming language of the internet. And it allows developers to add dynamic and interactive effects to any web page. We also use it to manipulate the content or the CSS, load data from remote servers, and really build entire applications in the browser, which we then call web applications. Now we can also use the analogy of nouns, adjectives, and verbs to make this separation of roles a bit easier to understand. So in this analogy, HTML represents the nouns, for example, saying that the P element is a paragraph. And so paragraph is the noun here. The CSS then is the adjective, because it describes the noun. Like this piece of CSS saying the paragraph text is red. And so here, red is the adjective describing the noun. And finally, JavaScript is of course the verb, like saying hide the paragraph. And so here we are doing something, and so we have a verb. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, since we've been talking a lot about dynamic effects and web applications here, let's now actually take a look at a real example to make it even more clear what JavaScript is capable of. And so this is the Twitter web application on twitter.com. And there is a lot happening as we open a profile page like this one. And so I thought that this was a very cool example. So right off the bat, you see that there are these two rotating spinners on the page, meaning that JavaScript is probably loading some data from the Twitter service in the background. Then, As the data arrives, JavaScript hides these spinners and instead shows the loaded content. So this is a very cool example of manipulating styles and content, right? But there's also some simpler dynamic effects on this page, like JavaScript showing the tweet box whenever we hit the tweet button and then hides it as we click outside of that box. And finally, JavaScript also displays this really nice user information as we hover our mouse over any user on Twitter. And it probably also loads this data on the fly. So a lot of cool stuff going on here, and it's all powered by JavaScript. How cool is that? And in fact, by the end of the course, you will actually know how to use all of these techniques that we just saw here. And so I hope that this makes you even more excited about all the content ahead. All right, now that we saw what JavaScript is really capable of, let's quickly recap and also look at other cool stuff that we can build with the power of JavaScript. So as you already know, JavaScript allows us to add dynamic effects to pages and, in fact, to build entire web applications in the browser. And these applications feel almost like the apps that we use on our computers and phones every single day. So we can say that JavaScript is what made modern web development and really the whole modern web itself possible in the first place. Now, if you're already somewhat familiar with the web development industry, you probably heard of modern JavaScript libraries and frameworks such as React, Angular, or Vue, right? And if you didn't, that's absolutely no problem. All you need to know is that these are basically tools that make writing modern, large-scale web applications a lot easier and faster. Now, what matters here is that all these frameworks and libraries are still 100% based on JavaScript. And what this means is that you should become really, really good at JavaScript before learning and using any of these frameworks, and not just jump into your first framework after you know how to write like 10 lines of JavaScript, okay? Also, your library of choice might not always be as popular as it is today. And the best way to be prepared is, you guessed it, becoming really good at JavaScript. Because then you can easily learn whatever is popular next. So no matter what anyone tells you, learning JavaScript properly is the single best investment that you can make in your web development career right now. Now, the JavaScript language and the web browser are actually two separate things. And what that means is that JavaScript can also run outside of web browsers. For example, it's possible to use JavaScript on a web server using a very popular technology called Node.js, which doesn't need any browser at all. And this allows us to create so-called back-end applications, which are simply applications that run on a web server and interact with databases and stuff like that. On the other hand, when we use JavaScript in the browser, we create so-called front-end applications. So in this course, we will learn the ins and outs of the JavaScript language itself, and of course also how to use it in the browser in order to create all these amazing effects that we've been talking about. So basically, we're going to be building front-end web applications. And in the future, I might also add a section about Node.js at the end of this course, so that you can get a sense of how we can use JavaScript outside of the browser environment as well. All right, and now just to finish, I want to mention that we can actually also use JavaScript to build kind of native mobile applications, as well as native desktop applications for any phone and computer operating system out there. That's because of modern tools like React Native, the Ionic framework, and tools like Electron. These have completely changed the whole development industry over the last couple of years, making things possible that were never possible before. So as you can see, there's almost nothing that you can't build after becoming really good at JavaScript, which, if you think about it, is really kind of mind-blowing. It's just amazing because the possibilities are so endless. Okay, and now to finish this lecture, I want to briefly talk about JavaScript releases, or versions as you might call them. We will come back to this topic by the end of the section because it's super important, But it's also a good idea to get a first overview of JavaScript releases at this point. Anyway, to make a long story short, there has been a huge update to the language in 2015, which is officially called ES 2015. But most people just call it ES6, simply because it was the release after ES5. And by the way, ES stands for ECMAScript. Now, after ES 2015, there is now a yearly new release with a couple new JavaScript features. In all of these new releases or versions, starting from ES 2015, is what we call modern JavaScript. But why am I telling you all this? Well, it's simply because in this course, I'm going to teach you modern JavaScript right from the beginning. And I wanted to make that very clear right from the start. However, I'm also convinced that you need to understand what came before ES 2015, so ES5. And so I will also show you what's important of ES5. The reason for that is in a complete video about JavaScript releases at the end of this section. Because now I no longer want to bore you with theory. So instead, let's now finally get started.